If Russia were to go to war with Europe, could Europe defend itself? This is not some crazy hypothetical. It was made real by Vladimir Putin this week, and his answer is clear. If Europe suddenly wants to start a war with us, it would end so swiftly for Europe that Russia would have no one left to negotiate with. What he's not saying is that a kind of hybrid war has already begun.
Confusion at 4 airports in Denmark last night when drones appeared in their airspace.
Germany's interior minister said Saturday that it has noticed an increased presence of drones.
Russia has been accused of attempted sabotage.
Russian cyber attack has the power to switch off the lights for millions.
For years, Europe has been questioning its own security, and it's more worried now than it's ever been that the world's foremost military superpower is growing weary of defending it.
We're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade.
And so, having to plan for this possibility that a Russian attack on Europe could be more than just a hypothetical, European military spending has surged. Defense plans are taking shape.
NATO has announced plans to beef up the defense of Europe's eastern flank.
A European drone wall, an eastern flank watch, an air defense shield, and a defense space shield.
And individual countries are openly discussing ways to bolster their ranks, to deter Russia from attacking, and to be battle ready if it does. Let me show you how Europe is rearming for war.
Europe's security paradigm has been shaken. The question is no longer if Europe is at risk, but how fast it can respond.
Honourable members, Europe is in a fight.
That is the president of the European Union's main executive branch. Her State of the Union address this year was about survival.
Make no mistake, this is a fight for our future.
And we can better understand the battle lines for that fight by understanding where and how Russia projects power. Ukraine has become such a focal point for European security because it is very much a doorway to the continent. But through Belarus, Russia already has a toehold into Europe. From here, it maintains military bases, stages troop offensives, even stations nuclear weapons. In mid-September, Russia held large-scale military drills with Belarus, which sowed fear and uncertainty because those kinds of exercises were also what preceded the start of the war in Ukraine. Another potential front, the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, considered by Europe to be a critical front line in any open war with Russia. Then there's this. On a map, sure doesn't look like Russia, but Kaliningrad is heavily militarized Russian territory. The country's Baltic fleet is based here. There's air defense, anti-ship missiles, and a tactical concern that by establishing a land bridge here connecting Kaliningrad to Belarus, Russia could try to sever the Baltic states from Central Europe. In this way, Kaliningrad is exposed, yes, but also very offensively positioned. And Germany is only a few hundred kilometers away, a country that has very recently felt firsthand what Russian encroachment may look like.
It could be in the south, it could be in the north, it could be along the long Finnish border. The Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, that are now members of NATO, used to be part of the Soviet Union. They would be difficult to defend if Russia decided to attack them. So in theory, this is a very serious, grave military threat.
Until now, what's made Europe's enemy on its doorstep less menacing is the American security umbrella, a guarantee of protection, which includes America's nuclear deterrent. But that security relationship has thinned under Donald Trump.
NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer.
And this isn't just bluster. There is a growing body of research examining this possibility of American withdrawal, gaming out right down to the specific fighter jets, naval destroyers, and missile batteries Europe may not be able to count on, and how the cost to the continent of providing its own alternatives, covering this gap in military power, might add up to about $1 trillion.
Europeans are looking at American politics. They're looking at Donald Trump and his America First, and they have no choice but to ask for how long can we count on the United States. And as a consequence, Europe has no choice but to invest in its own defense capabilities.
So in part to make up for these potential shortfalls, the EU has proposed an €800 billion plan, and these are four of its key pillars. Let's start with the European Drone Defense Initiative, a network of detection, tracking, and counter-drone capabilities, built specifically with the lessons of the Ukraine war in mind, and how they've become this kind of defining technology, providing surveillance, munitions guidance, even becoming precision missiles themselves, cheap weapons capable of crippling expensive systems. The Eastern Flank Watch is meant to combine air, ground, and counter-drone defenses, establishing a surveillance perimeter at both the Baltic and Black Seas while integrating into an existing command and control structure of NATO programs, such as the rotation of NATO fighter jets into Baltic air bases and the permanent forward deployment of troops to key countries making up the Eastern Front. The European Air Shield is all about missile defense and protecting airspace. Think of it like Europe's version of Israel's Iron Dome, except with one big strategic disadvantage, that Israel and Europe are nowhere near the same size. There is no single system that could defend the entire continent from the full range of Russian attacks, from short-range missiles to long-range hypersonics. So the system calls for a patchwork of defense bubbles to gradually build out more and more zones of protected airspace. Finally, there's the European Space Shield, protecting satellites and other assets from attack, from signal jamming, so that they can continue the work of facilitating navigation, surveillance, and communication.
All of a sudden, those capabilities, which have relied very heavily on an American backbone, are being re-energized now without America behind it.
These are all explicit, if admittedly vague, priorities laid out by the European Union, with a whole schedule of phased rollouts planned between now and 2030, because Russia, pouring incredible amounts of money into its military, quote, poses a persistent threat to European security for the foreseeable future. So these are core pieces of Europe's plan to counterbalance Russia's military strength. But there's a more immediate problem that has to do with the backbone of all these programs, and that's the mobilization of people. In some parts of Europe, conscription is a distant memory. 4 out of every 5 Brits, for example, won't even remember a time when forced military service was a thing because they weren't alive when it was a thing and then stopped being a thing in 1960. So nowadays, filling the ranks is hard.
The British military today is its weakest it has been in the last 200 years.
The UK's annual Strategic Defence Review describes the state of defence today like this: poor recruitment and retention, shoddy accommodation, falling morale, and cultural challenges, a workforce crisis, the number of regulars and reservists in persistent decline. This is also a very contentious issue in Germany, which is struggling right now to reprioritize its military because up to 1/5 of its commissioned officer posts aren't even filled. The parliamentary commissioner for the country's armed forces says the military has too little of everything. And consider, more broadly, when young people ages 18 to 35 were asked late last year if they would volunteer to help defend their own country or another European country from attack, more than half of respondents in Germany, France, the UK, and Spain said they would probably or definitely not volunteer. Finally, let's zoom out even further, continent-wide. A Gallup survey last year suggested less than 1/3 of EU citizens would be willing to fight for their country. That's less enthusiasm than the poll found in both Canada and the US.
If you're 20 years old today and you're therefore subject to conscription, you've grown up after the end of the Cold War. You don't have any personal memories of a divided Europe, the Berlin Wall, repression.
So across Europe, a fundamental shift in the conversation, whether to force more people to serve.
Could military service and even conscription become reality again in European countries?
Italy and Germany are floating the idea of requiring young people to report for military service.
There is a fairly stark line being drawn among EU countries. There are those who, for example, have abolished and so far rejected the idea of compulsory military service. Some, like France, though, are trying to incentivize it. They're, for example, introducing a new voluntary program to 18 and 19-year-old men and women for 10 months of paid military training. Germany, it's going a step further, with plans in 2027 to force all 18-year-olds to complete a questionnaire on their suitability to serve. But others, like Croatia, are actually set to reinstate conscription as early as next year.
There's a real emphasis and there's real money behind this to incentivize, getting young men and women in uniform, learning to shoot straight and to prepare for the eventuality of armed conflict, which, this generation was not prepared for.
Denmark is extending its draft to women and the length of compulsory service from 4 months to 11. And some countries are even further along than that. Latvia and Lithuania have already fully restored mandatory military service, citing the Russian threat. In fact, you take a look at those European countries where citizens already do or are set to undergo mandatory military service or training, you start to see a common geographic thread, right? The closer you get to Russia's border, the more urgently governments have acted to meet higher and higher troop targets.
I do think the frontline nations, the Baltics, Finland, Poland, there is a much more permissive political environment to spend more on defense and to talk about conscription. As you move further to the West, countries like Italy, countries like Spain and Portugal, they're much farther from the front. This is a harder sell.
It should go without saying, Europe considering this pivot from a peacetime economy to a wartime one has and will take an extraordinary amount of money. Last year, according to one independent research report tracking global military spending, Europe spent $693 billion US, a massive increase of 17% over the previous year, accounting for more than a quarter of the world's total military spending. And together, Europe's top spenders are outpacing Russia, dollar for dollar. Germany, the UK, France, Poland, and Italy, all together more than doubling Russia's defense spending. But experts warn what will ultimately give Europe peace of mind is going to take more than just program announcements and policies and people and even the pouring of money into all of these things. Europe's challenge is to stitch together what is currently a 44-nation patchwork of different approaches, different politics, different priorities, to somehow find a way to present a cohesive front against an opponent that is, at least for the time being, entirely unified under just one man, under one rule.
There isn't a central government like there is in the United States or like there is in Canada. They have passed sovereignty to Brussels when it comes to trade negotiations, but they have jealously guarded their sovereignty when it comes to questions of national security, military spending, military strategy. And so even though you have Germany ready to spend a lot more on defense, Germany talking about becoming a much more capable military partner, that's only a piece of the puzzle. The other piece is Germany going to work with France and Italy and Spain and Poland to rationalize defense spending and to collectivize defense strategy?
There are two saving graces, though. The first is that an overt attack, taking on the alliance of NATO or EU member countries, would be a very daunting red line for Russia to cross. The other saving grace, though, is that Europe's most immediate challenge isn't to figure out how to go toe-to-toe with the Russian army. It's not even figuring out how to wage war without American firepower. The task today is simply to deter, to make the case that any attack beyond Ukraine would be met with the weight of an entire continent bearing down.